Hello, everyone. This is Dave, and today's movie that we're talking about is Rodan, the 1956 classic that introduced us to the monster, Rodan. I know that seems kind of redundant, but hey, that's the name of the game here. Anyway, so I'll give you a quick synopsis of the creature Rodan, not necessarily the movie. He's basically just a giant flying pterodactyl. They call him of the species Rodan, which is a fictional species as far as I'm aware, and there's certainly no kaiju-sized pterodactyls that we currently know of, the largest being, I believe, the Quetzalcoatlus, which is pretty huge, but nowhere near kaiju proportions. That being said, let's talk about his powers for a minute. Rodan is one of those funny creatures who his powers are more him just sort of flying over things. He destroys buildings by causing gale force and hurricane force winds. Supposedly, he can cause sonic booms by flying at hypersonic speeds, and that's about it. He, in his very first incarnation in this movie, he has sort of a beam of focused wind that he can fire, but in later editions and pretty much every incarnation he doesn't have that other than this one. So we're just going to ignore that kind of off the list. It doesn't really come up that often anyway. He's more destructive by just flying over things. The problem with this is kind of twofold. He kind of falls by the wayside later on, which is why I think they started using him less and less. He ends up being in some of the stock footage in later films and whatnot, but here he's viewed as a threat akin to Godzilla, a product of, well, in the Americanized version, he's a product of nuclear, or in this case, I believe the opening said hydrogen bombs being tested. And this woke him up, or more accurately, woke up his egg. And I'll get into that when we talk about the movie in and of itself. And this continues with Toho's tradition, the Godzilla tradition, of viewing these monsters as sort of an allegory for what we're doing to the planet. Testing all these weapons and destroying the planet will cause the world to react somehow. And in this case, it releases this giant monster called Rodan. This can be seen in a few of the movies before Godzilla became what we call the good guy era, when he became the savior of the planet, or Earth Defender, I believe, is what the term is in a lot of common circles. And I like that version better. It's more like a natural disaster, something you have to deal with, something you have to understand that this is an animal. It's just acting out its instincts, but it's enormous and destructive. That's a very common trait among all kaiju. They're big and they're destructive. Now, some are actively malevolent and some are just animals. And it really runs the gambit between the two. Now, let's get to the movie itself. So Rodan opens up, at least the Americanized version, with stock footage of hydrogen bomb tests in the South Pacific. Now, this is key because this apparently, according to the Americanized version, wakes up Rodan from his slumber. Or more accurately, opens up his egg, or wakes up his egg. And I'll get into that in a second. So it starts off with this guy voicing over Shigeru. Shigeru is the narrator, and that's a difference between the American and Japanese version. They have a narrator, who is granted a character in the series that witnessed the events. But the problem with this is they take that away from a lot of the quiet times. There's times in the Japanese version that it's just, there's nothing happening other than the characters going through some sort of scenario. And in the American version, they decided that quiet wasn't for the best. They wanted to explain what was going on or what the character was feeling as he's doing this. And I think as a kid that worked better, but as an adult, I can see how that's a problem. It's not as good, and why the Japanese version is typically, in this case, preferred over the Americanized. Not just because of the dubbing and whatnot, but because of the added and the different places where things are cut together. And in general, I find that most people prefer the Japanese version, which is fine. I mean, I just watched both of them more or less, although more focusing on the Americanized version, since that is the one I most recently watched and watched as a child. So this guy Shigeru is talking about his life in his hometown, basically, and it's a mining village. And he works basically as a foreman or some such on on the coal mine. And there's a problem with the coal mine in that the floor is creeping. Now, I don't know much about coal mining, so I don't know if that happens, but I'm going to assume they know what they're talking about, at least in this regard. So what happens is there's a flood. They took too much coal out and they cracked into some underwater aqueduct or something, and there's a flood. And this causes a problem. And then there's a flood in a cave-in, basically. And what ends up happening is two of these guys disappear, Yoshi and Goro. And they find Yoshi's body, and they call it all mangled and whatnot. And you actually get to see them take the body, and like right before they do the autopsy, when they're cleaning him up in the morgue, I guess. They cut to this place a little bit. I guess it's a morgue. I when I was a kid, I just thought it was like a doctor's place, but now that I think about it, it's probably more like a morgue. Anyway, they bring him in there, and that was kind of shocking as a kid. These movies are usually rated pretty low in terms of harshness of their rating. So I think they're usually rated like G or PG at the worst. And seeing an actual like dead body being brought in, granted, it's not like gory or really bloody or anything. It's just sort of there, but still, the fact that there is a quote-unquote dead body is like a big deal. Like you rarely see the results of kaiju in these early films, and you rarely see people like get hurt or killed. And if you do, it's usually implied. Like you'll see rocks fall and someone will die or a building will collapse and they were in it, but they'll never show the body. So that's where this is kind of a little darker. And so anyway, the doctor examines the body. He's never seen wounds like this before. That's kind of strange, but they're like, okay. So they're thinking Goro killed this guy because they were fighting earlier. So they go in to investigate the mine, and there's some hubbub about things going on, and it turns out some other people go in. They hear some noises. They think it's Goro in the mine, and some noises coming from like in the flooded area. So they go to investigate, these three guys. I don't think they name them. I don't remember if they do or not, but I don't believe they do. And two of them get pulled underwater, and we hear this noise. This very strange noise. Kind of sounds like a dog chew toy being squeezed like at a different rate. It's kind of weird noise. And the third guy dials on the phone basically as he gets killed and dragged off, like not dragged off screen, but you presume dragged into the mine with the other three. And they find their dead bodies. So I don't know what the thing that's killing them is doing with the bodies. He just doesn't like people, apparently. He's just like, humans, you're living in these mines? No, we're living in these mines. So they still think Goro's doing it, but the nature of the wound seems strange. So Shigeru goes to talk with Goro's sister, the person he's engaged to. And I say that lightly because she only comes up a couple times in the entire movie, at the very beginning and the very end. And this giant creature busts into the back of their house. Not really busts in, he just kind of comes in through the back door. Apparently they left the back door open, and hey, giant monster comes in. Not that giant, though. It's about the size of, I'd say, 3 people in what amounts to a Chinese dragon outfit. It looks a little bit better than that, but it's basically like a giant land centipede lobster thing. And they later name this creature a Meganula, which comes up in later movies, but we'll get into that when it comes up. So they find out the Meganula has been killing all these people, and they chase it back into the mine, and Shigeru kills it with a mine cart, or a series of mine carts actually, drives it right into its big kaiju head, and this collapses more of the mine that was already unstable from the water collapsing, and Shigeru gets lost in this collapse. A few days later, they find him, and he has amnesia, and they're trying to jog his memory. Well, nothing's working. And suddenly, some strange things are going on. A UFO is spotted traveling around at supersonic speed. And that, in and of itself, seems unrelated to the earlier thing. And that's really where the problem starts. The first half of the movie is very much about Shigeru and life in this little town and this murder investigation. And about 40 minutes in, there's this earthquake, everything collapses, and then you start dealing with the bigger picture. This UFO is flying around. It's destroying things all over the Pacific theater, um, all over the place. It's not just local. It's not just this one town. It's everywhere. And um, they're they mention in the Americanized version that they believe there's two because of the sightings are so far apart at corresponding times. They're like, it can't be the same thing. It can't physically move that fast. And they try to intercept it, and jets get knocked out of the air, and the investigation is going on. No one knows what's going on. And then Shigeru gets his memory back by looking at this bird nest that his fiance shows him, and one of the little baby birds hatches. And that reminds him of what he saw. And this is the first time we get to see Rodan in all its glory. Before that, we just see kind of like blurry images and like brief enough where you get the gist, but not enough where you get to see the whole money shot, if you will. And the first time we see it is there's this giant egg. It's like huge, and Rodan literally busts out, and there's Meganula all over the place. These big, stupid-looking bugs, and Rodan eats them like they're little like mealy worms that you put out for like birds in a bird feeder. And it's kind of comical almost that this little baby Rodan, he actually looks really cute, hatching out, flapping his wings. And you see Shigeru in shock. He's horrified at seeing this enormous monster. And by this point, other people have started going missing. Apparently the Rodans like to kill and eat people. And I say Rodans because you quickly find out there are in fact two Rodans in this movie, not one. There are two. A mated pair that apparently hatched at the same time. That's mighty convenient, very interesting. So this is where the part with Shigeru kind of goes off. There's a little bit more investigating. Shigeru goes back with the group. They find some parts of egg, and they confirm that it's this creature, and it's this giant pterodactyl Rodan, and they confirm all that. That's all well and good. But then it cuts more to the traditional monster movie where the military comes in and the military has to stop this thing, and the Rodans go on a rampage and they destroy a couple cities, and everyone's horrified. The thing about it is the tone shifts once it becomes about the Rodans, because it goes from like a murder mystery to a typical kaiju film. And well, that's not a bad thing. That's what we're here for, right? We want to see the giant kaiju destroying cities. It feels so tonally different. It feels like they slapped two different movies together. And you spend so much time with this one character, Shigeru, that when we switch over to all the military people that really take center stage at this point, I don't know who any of these people are. I don't remember if they mention their names. I'm sure they do in the Japanese version, but in the American version, I don't remember them mentioning any of their names, or if they did, it was in passing or one sentence. And there's a lot of these military people. There's like a dozen of them, of all different types. There's scientists and everything, and they're all dealing with it. And it's just like you see them in every monster movie like this, these kind of people, explaining what to do. And so the Rodans, anyway, getting back to the story at hand, the Rodans go back to where they're living. They're living in the caves by where they were found. Well, the military says, well, they went back to sleep because apparently they're related to snakes. Now go figure that out. Giant flying prehistoric reptile is related to a snake. And apparently, what does a snake do when it eats? Goes to sleep. That's not exactly true, but I guess whatever. They're reptilians, and apparently a giant flying reptile is the equivalent of a snake that crawls on the ground. So apparently, since that works, they are like, okay, they're clearly sleeping in their houses for like a week at a time. So they go to Rodan's house, which is in the mine, or near the mine where the stuff all collapsed earlier in the film. And they basically just bombard the area that they're in until the rocks collapse. And this kind of pisses off the Rodans, but kind of not. They come out, but then the volcano that apparently was there erupts. And this is a problem because one of the Rodans gets hurt and can't fly away. And since they're a mated pair, I kind of like this part. They're a mated pair, so one of them, and they never state which one's the male, which one's the female, and they both look identical. So one of them gets injured and kind of falls into the magma stream, and the other flies in after it and kills itself effectively, not wanting to leave its partner behind. And I thought that was kind of nice. That was a nice touch. It kind of humanized these monsters. But at the same time, like, I don't know if that's a good thing because you're humanizing nature. And the idea of nature is that it isn't human. It's this sort of inhuman, indifferent presence that can be a source of great pain, but also a source of great, like, resources and usefulness. I mean, we all know that. Suffice it to say, though, the Rodans are now basically dead, and the movie ends with a closing narration about how sorry this guy feels and what monsters lie in the future. And that's quite interesting because there are quite a few that lie ahead. As it is, though, I don't know if I'd really recommend this one. It's kind of hard to say. Rodan is kind of, I don't want to I don't want to say bipolar, but it's like the first part is so much a murder mystery, and the second part is a typical kaiju film, and I don't know if they really merge well together. It's just they're so different, and I guess it's a matter of scale. The first part is very personal, and you get to know these different characters that are there, and you get to feel for their losses. You get to see the wives of people who have died in the mine screaming and effectively agony over the loss of their husband and whatnot. And later on, when the Rodans destroy whole cities, I mean, you see a few people upset, but it doesn't have the same level of impact. And I guess that's what I'm saying, is that I can see one person get murdered by what is effectively a giant land lobster, and that is more effective than watching the Rodans destroy an entire city. So I don't know how to really rate it. It doesn't really hold up as well in terms of monster movies, like straight up monster movies that would come later, or even some that came before. Again, because of that varied perspective. So I'll recommend this one only to diehard movie fans. If you really want to see where, Rodan came from, watch this movie. Otherwise, I'd say you'll get a better story out of some of the later entries that he's in. Worst case scenario, I'd say it's not a bad film. It's a little too edgy for young kids. I mean, if they're like, 7, 8, 9, 10, they'll probably be fine. But like younger kids usually watching silly Godzilla movies, this one's probably a little too scary for them. And in terms of like older people, it's a little dry, it's a little dark. I'd recommend the Japanese version over the American version. That'll almost always happen, however. But in the end, it's okay, but it's not a must-see. All right. Thanks, folks, for tuning in.